Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bluddworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today's video is why you should try OSR gaming. So this is a response video. I'm responding to J. Scott Garibay, who has a YouTube channel, and he also makes guest appearances on other YouTube channels as well. And his basic premise that I am going to not necessarily push back on, but I'm more inclined to counter it, and you'll see where I'm going with when I actually do that. So his argument was that if you are not playing the current edition of Dungeons and Dragons, so that means Wizards of the Coast 5e, that you are harming society, or certainly not advancing the hobby of tabletop role playing. And I, of course, have many issues with that particular stance. And starting with number one is that the tabletop role playing hobby is much larger than just Dungeons and Dragons. I know that he will be like, well, that's the 500-pound gorilla in the room, and Dungeons and Dragons is is by far the most recognizable game system within the tabletop role-playing hobby. I will certainly grant it that, but it's not the only part, and it's might be the most well known. But there have been times throughout the history of role-playing games when Dungeons and Dragons was either not very popular and all other were in the same boat. It had been surpassed at least once in popularity by Pathfinder First Edition, and it is kind of ebbing and flowing and kind of waning a little bit right now as well. And so, I could certainly see where it is not always going to be the go-to game within the tabletop role-playing hobby. Or at least that's my belief, that there will be a time when it has a smaller portion of the market than all of the rest of the games that are out there. I certainly think that's a possibility. It might always be the largest amongst the many, but it's certainly not the one that I don't think it's the one game that if you said, well, if this disappeared, the entire hobby would collapse. It's certainly not the case. I do not believe that. And it would take a lot to convince me that that's not going to happen, or that would happen, I should say. So let's get back to my idea: why you should try OSR gaming. So once again, I'm not going to tell you that you are harming anybody by not trying OSR gaming. All I'm saying is that you should give it a look, see what's there, and then decide for yourself. I'm not telling you what percentage of any game you should be playing. I'm not telling you that if you don't take a look at the OSR, society will collapse. I'm not telling you that the hobby will not continue on if you devote any kind of time or money towards the OSR. But what I am going to say is that the OSR has something to offer that I think you should take a look at. And so without further ado, I am going to kind of put my teacher hat on and do a little PowerPoint presentation. And then I think I'm going to package it up into a little analogy that I thought of when I was thinking about putting together this video. So let me go to the PowerPoint first. So here we have why you should try OSR gaming. Because there are several definitions of what makes a game an OSR game. You have old school Renaissance, old school revival, and old school role playing. All right, and very, very briefly, Renaissance is a modern game that is adopting about 80 to 90% of an older system and then just advancing it a little bit, modernizing it, changing it in a little ways. And I'll get into more detail with that. Revival is something that I enjoy doing, and that is playing the original or close to the original editions of role-playing games. That's not just Dungeons and Dragons. Remember, the TTRPG hobby is bigger than just Dungeons and Dragons. So when I talk about revival, I have run games with D&D Beckme. I've run AD&D First Edition games. I've also run or participated in Twilight 2000 games. I have run Star Frontiers games. I have run Bushido, Villains and Vigilantes, and a number of other games, Gangbusters as well. So revival means just playing the older editions of the games, regardless of the actual game itself or the genre or whatever. It's just old school games. And then there's old school role playing, which is playing the way that the games used to be played back then with the focus and such. I have a number of videos where I kind of go into slicing up this particular onion so that you can all see the various parts of it. Maybe that's a wrong analogy, and because of this, the OSR offers a greater diversity of genre, style, mechanics, and tone compared to playing an RPG created by just one developer who focuses on just one game system. So, and I understand this is not just Wizards of the Coast, but this is any game system that just has one product line out there, and they're putting all of their eggs in that one basket. And if you just engage in that one game from that one company, I think you're really limiting your opportunities to discover other games out there. And I will get to the next point. The OSR is completely independent of corporate concerns, shareholders, and the influences of social media activists, which allows the OSR the freedom to delve into systems or themes that are more on the fringe, risky, and quite honestly more intriguing. At least that's certainly my interpretation, my opinion, that they're more intriguing. What do I mean by this? Not being connected to corporate concerns doesn't mean that they don't have a capitalist, model or motive to themselves. They all want to make money. All right, that doesn't make them corporate. What makes them corporate is when decisions are made by the gaming company to design the game in a way to maximize their profits and a total disregard for the content and the quality of the game. You only see this really with big corporations. So I know going back in the day when EA started putting out these really shoddy, I remember it was like their football games started to go on, the Madden franchise started going into the crapper because the games were just coming out really poor quality. I mean, mechanically there was a lot of bugs and all kinds of stuff, and you only get that from a big corporation that's just frankly willing to put out a mediocre product and know that you'll still buy it and still buy into it. So that's what I mean by corporate concerns. So the OSR is completely independent of that because none of the OSR games are produced by corporations. They haven't been gobbled up by corporations. They're mostly small, small scale publishers that are out there. And that gives them the freedom to make games that I'm not going to mention any games by name because I want you to go out there and investigate on your own. All right, so I'm not going to endorse any particular games, because I just want you to be clear when you're going looking out there. So the OSR is far more open to independent contributors, third-party creators, with very flexible rules or even no rules for producing products using their systems. The OSR is a breeding ground for self-publishing creators without all of the corporate limitations. When you are writing an adventure for 5th edition, I'll use the 500-pound gorilla in the room, and you're putting it on DM's Guild, there are certain parameters that your adventure must meet. All right, they have to be inclusive of all of the races or classes or all of those the major portions of what's found in the player's handbook. And you can't write an adventure. I'm assuming because I've never written for DM's Guild, but you can't deny access to those racial or class combinations that were that are in the book. And so that's a limitation that's coming from them, where if you're writing for the AD&D second edition clone, all you have to do is just say that this is not associated with the original author of that OSR title. That's it. That's the only restriction you have. You can modify everything about the game rules that you wish in your adventure. All right, and all you have to do is cite the original author and say that this is not a product of his, and that's all. All right, so that's what I mean by not having to adhere to any real rules, or they're very flexible as to what you can create as a third party contributor. That freedom that I've mentioned is an open door for more innovation, better formatting, or layout of older systems. Now, this is very key, and this is where that old school renaissance comes in, because what these creators are doing is they are taking the old systems. They have to, in order to fit within the OGL, they have to alter a certain portion of it. It's usually a percentage portion. I believe it's between 80 and 90%. So they can only maintain 80 or 90%. So 10 to 20% must be changed. And what they're changing is they're doing better formatting. All right, because to be perfectly honest, some of those older edition games were just not formatted very well. The Dungeon Master's Guide AD&D First Edition is a nightmare of formatting. All right, its layout is confusing and such. It needed a modern touch. Modernization of the older systems also, you see a lot of this with the variations of the type of dice or even diceless, which I really probably wouldn't like, but just modernizing the mechanics of playing the game. Not necessarily the game mechanics, but the way that you rolled the dice, or as far as like adding exploding dice or advantage, disadvantage, and so on. That's a more modern element of role-playing games, which is pretty popular, and so it does make sense if you're creating an old school Renaissance game that you would include some of these modernized efforts that are a better quality. I will certainly say that it leads to a more streamlined and fun way of playing the games, and so it's an improvement that you find within the OSR. and that's an important thing. In short, the OSR is a movement that is creating better games. Again, my opinion, but I think it bears out in the multitude of games that you can look at, and you can almost always find one element in virtually any OSR game that you look at and say, you know what, that's an improvement from where it was. That's a good system, or that's a good element of the system that I really like, and you find that in the OSR. These are not my words, all right? This comes from Mr. Garibay. The OSR has attracted most of, or the best and the brightest, and experienced DMs and GMs in the TTRPG hobby. Now, I could have cleaned up this sentence a little bit better, for certain, but bottom line, his argument was that the OSR has attracted the best and the brightest and the most experience of DMs and GMs. Um, Again, that's a lot of opinion thrown in there. You know, you could certainly make the argument the most experienced DMs and GMs, and he does spend a little time kind of disparaging old school DMs for using the term DM. So I'm going to clarify something, the way I use Dungeon Master versus Game Master. All right, and I have no problem with using the word master. You know, so if anyone's going to quibble over that, you know, toughen up. It's not a bad word. So a dungeon master is usually used, and it's historically used in games with dungeons. All right, so that includes Dungeons and Dragons. That would include Dungeon Crawl Classics. That would include, you know, Tunnels and Trolls, or any, you know, even to the extent I would say that, you know, Middle Earth role playing. If you're dealing with a lot of dungeon crawling, which you can in that game, then a dungeon master might fit there too. Although maybe more so game master, since a game master is going to apply to any game where there's virtually no dungeons, and it might not even be the genre where you're dealing with dungeons. So when we were playing James Bond, all right, we weren't calling it a dungeon master. It would make sense. All right, I forget what they were called in James Bond, but certain systems have their own unique names. So Call of Cthulhu is Keepers. Mifrog is Mythmasters. Um, when the Conan 2D20 was being developed by Modifius, I had made the suggestion when there used to be Google Plus. I had made the suggestion that they should use chroniclers, all right, to give an homage to you know, the Nemedean Chronicles, and so the game master should have been called a chronicler, and because he or she then would be basically retelling the stories as the player characters created them, you know, and so they would be chronicling it, you know, keeping track of what was going on. But instead, they stuck with the game master, which I thought was a missed opportunity. But yeah, there's nothing derogatory about game master. Um, there's nothing generic about it. It's just that it better fits certain game systems than others. Certainly genres, different game genres than others, and dungeon masters are more unique to games that include dungeons, obviously. So we'll move on. Many systems in the OSR have a cheaper entry point than the big corporate games. Some provide a single book core format where all you need is the one book to run, play, and even create games from there. So it doesn't matter if they have, oh well, we give a free copy of the basic rules, and then you only have to buy the player's handbook, or you need multiple items. Then it doesn't match up to a game system that is all contained in one volume. So again, it's it's a cheaper entry point when you only have one book, and even if they do provide free parts of it as a PDF, you still have to go through the trouble of doing that. And so there's a much easier entry point into a game system when there's only one book. Many give options, and this is again the OSR. Many give options for PDF, softcover, and hardback, and also combinations of physical and digital formats for one price. So usually they'll have something like, well, it's $10 for the PDF, it's $20 for the softcover, but if you get the softcover, then you get the PDF for free. All right, so you'll get that combination. Or hardback, it'll be, $30 with a free PDF along with it. So they give you various price points that you can come in at. All right, and that's because they have the different formats. Most softcover and PDF options are under $20. You might find one that's a little bit more expensive than that, and guess what? They don't sell as many. All right, it's not when you have a huge selection that are selling under that $20 price point, and that $20 price point is basically the softcover, because most PDFs are $10 or below. Some are even $5 or below, and there's a particular price point on Drive-Thru RPG that is $4.99. And the reason why they will list it at $4.99 instead of $5 is because it puts them into the under $5 price category, which gets its own display category, and then players or prospective DMs or GMs can look into there and look for a game that they want to try to pick up and take a look at, and so on. So then there are a few systems that are free in PDF. All right, again, you can find them out there. It's an entire game system, free in PDF form, and they know that they will get their money down the back end. Remember, they're not corporate, but they're still capitalists. They're still looking to make money from their products, and that's completely understandable. The default for OSR players and GMs is that we are not game, genre, or system exclusive. All right, and this goes back to the experience that I was talking about. I don't know any OSR GMs or DMs who only play one game. All right, it just doesn't make sense that they would do that. Even the publishers of OSR games tend to produce more than one product line, and that includes more than one genre. All right, I know of one of my favorite OSR publishers. They have fantasy, they have zombie apocalypse, they have kids on bikes, they have superheroes, they have very similar to Transformers, and so on and so on. They have so many different genres, many of which actually work off the same game system, so they're interchangeable. But that's one company, one publisher producing such a variety of genre and play style and tone that you just don't get that from the big corporate producers of tabletop RPGs. Why don't I tell anyone which games to play? Because that is an issue of personal taste. There are too many good games out there to play or to run, and I prefer to treat you like an adult. You are able to make your own choices on how to spend your precious time and money, but particularly your time, your leisure time, because so many of these options are cheap or even free. It's your time that's valuable. And any time you're sitting at a table with a group of friends, or even if it's virtual, and you're sitting on a screen and looking at a group of friends, and you're playing a game, and you're having a good time, that time is well spent. irregardless of what game you're playing. All right. It's just what we're here for. So if you haven't tried playing or running an OSR game, give it a shot. You have nothing to lose. There are free options out there. Find a cheap option that matches your taste and run with it. Run it with your group as a one shot. See if they like it. If they like it, you could start integrating it into your regular schedule. You might find a game that you like so much, and I'm going to get right to my analogy. Or if you're a player, ask your GM if he or she will be willing to run a one shot and give it a try. You buy the book, you give it to, or the PDF, you give it to your GM and say, hey, take a look at this. Maybe we can squeeze this in and do a one shot with this. The analogy. So actually, I will put that off for one more second because I have one more set of kind of things that I experience at the table. All right, and I recommend that you do this. If you are an OSR DM or GM, this is what I recommend you do. Ask your players to, have a seat. Welcome everyone at your table. Get to know the new people at your table, and you remember that you're all sharing the same love for the hobby. All right, the TTRPG hobby. That's what you have in common. The game might be new to them, it might be new to you, but the hobby is what you're there for. All right, and if the game fills that, that ideal spot for you, then that's even the better. Explore new game systems. Don't limit yourself to just one game or one genre or one company that produces that one game or that one genre. Search out there. Find what is going to fit your style better. Most of all, have fun. We are participating in one of the best hobbies ever created. Never limit yourself or your players to just one game. So I am going to, that's the end, right? Yeah. So that's the end. So let me go to this screen here. There we go. It's starting to get dark out. I got to put a light on soon. The analogy. I see the tabletop RPG hobby as a massive building with 1,000 different configurations of rooms. And when you walk in and you're looking to just stay the night, all right, let's say it's like a hotel, all right, 1,000 different configurations of rooms that are inside there. You're just looking to spend the night. All you're looking for is a cheap room that has a bed, a bathroom, a lamp, and obviously, comfortable conditions. So you're only spending a night. So you go in, you hang out for the night. All right, next morning you move on. That's your one shot. All right. Next time you're going out, you're on a mini vacation. Maybe you're going away for the weekend. All right, you're going to want a room now that has, the bed, the bathroom, maybe a dresser to put some of your clothes in because you're spending 2 or 3 days there. You want a chair and then maybe a second lamp so that you could sit down at the table and and read. That is a slightly longer buy-in. All right, that might be a mini campaign that you're running. You're starting to like this hotel. You decide, you know what, I am going to stay for 2 weeks now. All right, I'm going to go in for that longer campaign. All right, so I want a few more amenities in the room that I'm staying in. All right, it's going to cost me a little bit more to stay here. All right, so I might have to buy a few supplements to do this. But I'm going to come back to this vacation site a couple times a year. You really enjoy it. You decide, you know what? I'm ready to get an apartment so that I can run whatever game I really feel like running, and so these are the amenities that I want in my apartment. And yes, my buy-in is a little bit more, My buy-in is much longer term. I could spend a year here, maybe even more, all right, while I'm doing this. All right, and now I want, virtually everything that I didn't have before. I want that in my apartment. All right, finally, I look back and I say, you know what? It's time to buy a house. So I'm going to buy multiple editions of this one game system and a whole bunch of other game systems as well, and this and that, and I want 10 different games so that when I could have more friends and family come to the house, and we could have a game night. That's we always have it going on, and now this is the real deal, right? I have friends coming into my home and we're playing on a regular basis. And it's a set group of people that I can count on, and we're friendly, and it's just a totally different atmosphere, an in person atmosphere in our home. All right. And then as you get older and you start thinking to yourself, you know what? Kind of moved on to those really big, complicated, things. Maybe I just want to go back to a simpler game. I want to return to some game systems that I used to play. And I don't need all of these bells and whistles and everything like that. I can streamline this. All right. Maybe when I get so much older, I'm going to downsize my house. All right. Or maybe what I'll do is, and it's almost dark now. Maybe what I will do is I will go back and buy my parents' home. And so when I buy my parents' home, I'm getting back to the starting point, and I'm going to be comfortable. I'm going to feel like this is really my space, and I'm going to recapture that nostalgia. I'm going to recapture that feeling of when I first started out, when I was younger and I first started playing these games. All right. That is the OSR. All right. The OSR, for some of us that have had that long history within the hobby, is that coming home feeling. And so we're looking for that simplicity, and we're looking for that, that warm home kind of feeling to it. It just feels right. Right? That's what the OSR has to offer. And I'm not saying you can't find that in other games. I'm not saying you can't find that in 5e. 5e might be your starting point. All right. And 10, 20, 30 years down the road, you might look back. All right. Because 5e will eventually become something else. And you might look back at 5e as, oh, that's my OSR. I know some people in the OSR argue, oh no, it'll never be that. Everything becomes that. Everything becomes old school. Guns N' Roses plays on the oldies station. I mean, that's the first time I realized that. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm starting to feel it. Music that I was listening to in the 80s and early 90s is now on the oldies station. Someday the modern game systems are not going to be modern anymore. And so that's where the OSR is. All right. The OSR is saying we're not going to give up on that in the past. We're still going to keep that going. And that is the way forward, because every modern game becomes OSR. All right. That's the hobby. All right. That's putting the hobby first. That's dedicating yourself to the hobby. All right. Because these games aren't going away. All right. They're not going to disappear. We had another conversation going on parallel to this. What if D&D disappeared tomorrow? All right. Would the hobby still survive? Absolutely. Would Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition still survive? Absolutely. People still have the books. People will still be able to find those books on the internet and buy them. I replaced every 1st edition book I had. All right. I just picked up the Deities and Demigods 144 page. All right. You can still find the older books. So it's never going to go away. It's never going to die out. And even if every book was ever collected that ever existed out there, you know, we know enough about the game systems, and this really came out of the OGGM, his comment this morning about it, or maybe it was last night. Um, we know enough about the game system that we could just go and start jotting down some things. I mean, we all know enough of the rules. Um, if you don't know how to roll attributes by now, I mean, I don't know what you've been doing because it's a very simple system. 3d6, and you know the six attributes, and you can build your own system just based on memory around, what you remember about those, particular elements of the game. I guarantee you're going to come up with something closer to really old school than the more modern game. All right, and that's because we're still familiar with them. So once again, I apologize about the lighting. It suddenly got dark. But once again, thanks for joining. I welcome your questions and comments. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Again, leave your comments in there. Just keep them, keep them above board, so no nastiness or anything like that. You're welcome to disagree with me. And subscribe if you haven't subscribed. And let me know what games you're playing out there. All right, give me some examples of the OSR games that you're playing, or the OSR games you're taking a look at. If I get enough people that come in and say, hey, you know what, can you do something on game ABC? Then if I have it, I will do a video just for, breaking down game ABC. I'll do character creation and the whole 9 yards. I have tons and tons of games behind me. If it came out within the last couple of years and it's an OSR game, there's a good chance that I have it. If I don't and it's available out there and it's fairly cheap, then I will even consider picking it up so that I can, so I can cater to your request and do a little thing on it as well. So again, thanks for joining. Have a great afternoon, great rest of your weekend. Stay safe out there, and I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime soon. You have a great evening.